What's up, Poke Trainers? I am your host, Phoenix, and welcome to NTAT. With the Teal Mask DLC being out for a while and Pokemon fans all over giving their opinion on the first two additions to the Scarlet and Violet games, I thought it would be a great idea to revisit the base games, and how I feel about them might surprise you. Scarlet and Violet is my favorite and best Pokemon games in the series. Yes, I know this is a controversial opinion, but there are two caveats to this statement. One, this is my subjective opinion, and two, in the illustrious words of King Julius of Madagascar, this is my video, so shut up.
Oh, shut up, you're so annoying!
So why does this even matter a year after the games have been released? Well, with the Teal Mask releasing, I wanted to do another playthrough of the game, and we all know that subsequent playthroughs of games or viewing movies bring a completely different perspective to the content as you are beyond the hype window and newness. After finishing that playthrough, I realized that this is exactly what I've been wanting from a Pokemon game from the beginning. I'm going to break down why I feel so strongly about this entry, as well as things that I believe can improve with the games and the series as a whole. I think this is important for you to know how I consume this content because I am not a PokeTuber, nor am I a competitive battler. I'm coming from the perspective of a gamer dad who loves the series and enjoys role-playing with my kids in the game. With that out of the way, let's jump right in. The short answer is the open world itself. When I go through a playthrough of any Pokemon game, I start by figuring out my team's composition. Who is my starter? And then who I like and who complements my team build. Although this was always a fun step, it was always limited one in every single Pokemon game until Scarlet and Violet. This is where the first part of the magic of the open world comes into play. In previous games, it was ideal to always pick one or two of the first few Pokemon that were revealed because the chances that they were early area Pokemon was high. Regional birds, bugs, normal types. The reason why this is important because Game Freak has always locked some of the coolest Pokemon at the end of the game where they are no longer viable in the playthrough. Want a Bravery on your playthrough? Too bad, you can't even get one before Victory Road. Don't get me started on pseudo legendary Pokemon. They were almost always only available after your 8th badge. Why is this important? Well, one of the things I love about Pokemon is that you start with a low-level team of first stage Pokemon and go on this grand adventure where you get stronger together, create memories through gym battles and defeating your rivals. By the end of your journey, you have a team of high-level, strong, fully evolved Pokemon, all with a story to tell. By the time you get to Victory Road, you're at the end of your journey, and if you want one of these late game Pokemon, you are grinding out to level them up to your team's level, and then running through maybe a couple of hours, if that, of game with them. There is no attachments, no stories, just mindless grinding. I have done that and felt nothing for these Pokemon. But I did feel terrible about pulling a teammate that I had been traveling with for 30 hours or more just to replace them with a Pokemon just because they were supposed to be stronger. This is not an issue in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet because their open world allows you to go anywhere from the beginning of the game with very few exceptions. Realistically, you could have almost any Pokemon you want for your playthrough between the first 3 gyms, even pseudo legendaries. This was fantastic, and I was able to figure out my team build and then set out on my adventure knowing I was able to get all of them early enough to enjoy them all the way through. The open world, as I said, is key to fixing this problem. It is exactly as I always thought Pokemon should be. When you watch the anime, you will see Pokemon living in the wild, in their ecosystems, having their own temperament and routines. No more finding all Pokemon by random in tall grass. These Pokemon are out in the open, tunneling through desert sands, swimming in lakes and oceans, or flying through the skies near mountaintops. This is what makes this game feel like a real Pokemon world. Scarlet and Violet has also solved one of my long-running issues with legendary Pokemon. Typically, legendaries are available at the end of the game, even box legendaries. To an extent, this makes sense. These are the most powerful archetype of Pokemon, and giving them out at the beginning of the game seems counterintuitive to their existence. With that said, they suffer from the same issue. If I get one once my adventure is over, then what exactly do I have? A trophy that I put in my box and never touch again, basically. The one exception to this, for me anyway, was Giratina in Pokemon Platinum. as you do get access to him after the 8th gym, but you have to travel to the distorted world and figure out the puzzles, and then you're given a chance to catch him. This was fantastic, or I think it was a fantastic way to engage with a new Pokemon, and once I caught him, I felt like I had earned it, and I had a much better understanding of him, and that led me to want to place him on my team right before Victory Road. In Scarlet and Violet, the box legendary is with you from the beginning of the game. Although you can't battle with them, you get to know them, and they grow with you and your team as you uncover its mysteries. By the time I was able to have them join my team in battle, it was a no-brainer. I was attached, as it had been a part of my team since day one. Also, the 4 treasures of Paldea was perfectly done as well. These legendaries can be accessed as soon as you figure out their puzzles. Realistically, you can catch them between level 50 and 60, which in this game, you are still working through at least 2 of the 3 storylines and still have a ton to go with the post-game story. Chinpo was one of the treasures I thought looked cool and had a nice typing to add to my team. I grabbed him at level 60 and he helped me take out the Elite Four, my rivals, and a host of trainers, as I mentioned before, the post-game story. Speaking of rivals, I think this was my favorite cast of friends I have ever had in a Pokemon game. I have had my individual favorites like Blue, In, and Barry. This is the first time I had multiples in one game. This was achieved as each rival, Nemona, Arven, and Penny, all have their separate adventures with the player character. In these adventures, you get to know them and their backstory and why they are who they are. Nemona, in my opinion, being the best of the 3, tries to push you as a trainer each time she battles by adding to her team. Ultimately, she fails at this, but more of that in a minute. By the time the end scene for the main story comes about, I was all smiles, seeing my crew together and wanting to have more adventures. The open world that Game Freak created has given birth to a world that feels like an anime. It feels like you're on an adventure with friends and your Pokemon and discovering many things along the way. Now, that does not mean that there is not issues that this game, or Pokemon in general, needs to fix. As I mentioned earlier, Nemona fails to push you as a trainer, right? Well, that's because Pokemon has yet to find a balance between casual fun and difficulty. I am not the type to say that the earlier games are harder and the newer games are easier. Well, minus Sword and Shield, as power creep was at an all-time high. But the reality is the earlier games were harder because of artificial difficulty like power levels, or the fact that the game was new and we didn't know type matchups the way we do now. I think what Pokemon needs is a simple difficulty setting, Adventure Mode and Pokemon Master Mode, with the latter allowing trainers and gym leaders to have held items, more Pokemon on their team, and a better moveset to fit their strategies. Speaking of strategies, I know the big problem with the champion with this game wasn't the team's composition, but rather the order in which she sends them out has been a big complaint. I think this is a great example of how Master Mode could do something as simple as changing the order that she sent them out, having Glamora as her lead Pokemon to spread poison spikes upon defeat on the field, and her last Pokemon being King Gambit, with his Supreme Overlord ability allowing him to become stronger based on the amount of allies who have been defeated, at which point would have been 5. Back to the open world, I can't admire what they built without noticing the horrible pop-ins and lag. Watching people walk in the background looking like a glitched out Sims character always breaks the immersion. It's obvious that the time frame needed for these games to be on par with the anime is going to make performance of these games worse and worse if they don't get a handle on this sooner rather than later. I don't know if they need to pull a Call of Duty and have 3 to 4 teams working on these games in rotation so they have 4 to 5 years between each game or what, but they can't continue to release these games in a buggy state each year and expect things to continue to go well. DLC versus new games. Now, this is more of a personal preference than something that needs to be fixed. Some people like DLC model, some people like having the games come back out with more content and context like Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon. For me, I think DLC, at least money-wise, makes sense. The only exception to this rule would be Black and White 2, as they were full-blown sequels. With that being said, I personally want the DLC to have more reasons for me to battle with my assembled team. I'm really excited about taking on another Elite Four in Part 2 of the DLC for S&V. If they give really good quests, new legendaries, I'm all for it as long as I'm not just chasing them around the map. I could nitpick for hours on smaller things that they could improve upon, but for now I will say that I love these games, and I want to see more like these, with improvements of course. When you roleplay, especially with these established lore, stories, and expectations, you want to see the games lean heavily on them, And I feel like these are the first ones to get the world itself right. Yes, I love the previous games, but they were limited in what they could bring from the anime. Now we have a real taste of a living, breathing Pokemon world, and they can't put this genie back in a bottle. All they can do now is go forward and continue to bring these worlds to life.